I hope you're all having a lovely day as I am on this beautiful sunny day. I'm Mark Winston from our own SFU's Morris J. Wass Center for Dialogue, and I am greatly honored to be able to facilitate our session today, which is going to focus on research and the developing medical school at Simon Fraser University. I want to begin with just a couple of technical things. If you want to know who's here, you can click on participants. If the chat is only to communicate directly with the host, but if you do need to communicate with our host, you can click on chat and send a message to the Zoom host. And if you would like to use the closed captioning, you can click on live transcriptions. I'm gathering most of you probably know quite well how to use Zoom, and those are just kind of the basics that'll help us get going. In terms of the agenda for the afternoon, we've got a lot to do. Beginning now with a short welcome and introduction. And in a moment, we'll be having a welcome from Elder Marie Hooper. And then our Vice President of Research, Dugan O'Neill, will deliver a short presentation giving you some background and some information up to date. We'll have a chance to ask some questions, both some that were submitted previously and some questions from the floor as it is. And then for those of you that would like to stay and go dive a deeper dive into some of the questions around research in the medical school, we'll have breakouts and a chance for you to have a deeper discussion about some of the issues around the research. And following that, we'll have a few closing remarks, and I can promise you we will be done quite promptly at 3. It's my great pleasure to introduce our Vice President of Research at Simon Fraser University, Dugan O'Neill. Dugan has been thinking about research in the medical school ever since the ideas came up. He's going to be talking with us for a few minutes, just bringing everybody up to date on what we do know. And following that, I'll be asking Dugan 3 questions that have been pre-submitted when you registered, and then you'll have a chance for a bit more of a open conversation before we jump into breakout groups. So with that, Dugan.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, Elder Marie, for getting us started in a good way. So I think we have a few slides to share, and here they come. So our purpose today, this is part of a series of community discussions with various foci, and today the focus is on research. And so there are a number of questions that people may have about the medical school more broadly. Happy to do my best to answer those questions. Some of them at this stage of the game are not answerable, but I'll take a shot. But most of the conversation today is really about research, the research program of the medical school, and how we can take advantage of the fact that SFU is already a strong research institution that already has a lot of strong human health related research that can be a basis for the research program of the medical school. So the focus of today is research. I can't give you a prescription of a list of exactly what research we're going to be doing at the medical school. I can provide some context and some thoughts. And then in the breakout, and maybe through the conversation even before the breakout, we'll get some of your suggestions as to how you think we should build on our existing strengths in a new medical school. Next slide, please. So first, an overview of the medical school itself. So I think everyone who lives in British Columbia is aware that we have a shortage of family physicians. And the province has a long-term commitment to improve access to that primary care. There are probably people on the call today who don't have a family doctor. And if you do have a family doctor, you probably know some folks who don't. And so one of there's a whole bunch of different strategies the government's putting in place to address that concern, and we're part of that. We have an opportunity at SFU as a publicly funded institution to help address the issue in the medium to long term. And we do that by educating the next generation of doctors. We will have a special focus in the Fraser Health region. And we'll also be looking to train a large number of primary care physicians to serve BC's growing and diverse populations, particularly underserved populations and Indigenous peoples. And so sometimes when people start describing the vision for the SFU medical school, they get to this point and everyone kind of assumes that we're building a kind of primary care school where we're going to graduate 100% primary care physicians or family practice physicians. But of course, that's not the case. And that's particularly relevant for the research that will be done at the school. We're building a medical school. So if this continues and we, 3 years from now, have students coming in, some of those students will choose family practice and some of them will not. We'll graduate some folks who will specialize and they'll become neurosurgeons. We'll have some folks that specialize and they become cardiologists, and we'll have some folks that specialize in more community-based, team-based care. And so it's not that we're designing a program that only trains people who will go into primary care. It's that we're designing a program that will support and encourage people to pursue a career in primary care. And that starts early, before folks are even admitted. Who do we target to try to get encouraged to come to the program? Hopefully we can encourage people who are interested in primary care. Hopefully we can also encourage people who are members of underserved communities, who are Indigenous, who want to go back into community and be primary care physicians. So we will have a full service medical school, but we hope that by implementing the curriculum and the admissions process and everything through the whole philosophy of the school, to have a large fraction of students who graduate choose family practice on their own. Next slide, please. So where are we so far in this in the process? And from some of the questions that were submitted in advance, I think some folks think we're farther along than maybe we are in the process of planning and building a medical school. Some of the detailed questions that people have submitted, I can't answer, but also no one else can either, because it's just too early in the design and planning cycle. But we have established working groups of SFU senior leaders, external medical education experts, and partners to help us shape the options for curriculum space, workforce, and research. And we have until the end of May to submit something to the province that they're calling a business case for the province's investment. I'll get back to the business case in a second, but it's also the case that for a medical school, we have to go through an accreditation process, and that accreditation process has to complete before students are admitted to the program. And so that means that a bunch of things have to be done in parallel. While we're building the business case, we're also in touch with the accreditors and are starting an application for that process. Because if you wait until everything else is done and then start your accreditation, it's too late. So on the business case, I would say that it's not a clearly, easily defined term. What do we actually have to submit by the end of May? I will say that it's not. We have to submit a document that allows the government to assess what are the goals of this medical program, what are we expecting to produce from this medical program, and what are all of the resources required from the province in order to support us so that we can deliver it. And so if you think of it in terms of do we need a building for the medical program, like a capital expense, then we can say, well, yes, we need a building and it needs to support this many people in the building. But the thing we submit on May 31st doesn't say here's where all the bathrooms are, and here's how big the clinic space will be exactly. Things are still going to shift quite a lot after that business case. And you can think of that same thing for the curriculum. Some of the questions that we get are, I'm in a certain department that's not in the medical school. Will I be able to teach this course inside the medical school in 2026? And we're not at that stage yet of the planning to be able to answer some of those questions. Right now, it's really at the how many people, what kind of curriculum, how big a program, how many students coming in, how many faculty need to be hired, things like that that drive resource decisions in the province. Next slide. So for the purposes of today's discussion, I thought it was useful to put some numbers on the table. Now, these numbers are still subject to change, but let's call them working assumptions so that people can have an idea of the scale of the enterprise we're trying to set up and rough timelines. So as I mentioned, we're talking about a first class being admitted for the fall of 2026. This was in the government's public announcement. It's going to start small and grow from that in terms of number of students. And so the numbers that we're talking about right now, again, this is draft and still subject to change, but is starting with something like 48 to 64 students per year, growing to an ultimate size of about 120 students per year. Exactly how many faculty members you need to deliver that program might depend on exactly what program we intend to deliver, which isn't finalized yet. But for the sake of having some numbers on this slide, starting with something like 20 to 30 new faculty hires and growing to 40 to 50 over time. It's particularly challenging to count faculty members in a university that has a medical school compared to one that doesn't. It's because there's more than 1,000 expected associated clinicians in some kind of clinical appointment that will associate themselves with the school. And so even when you go to other universities and you try to compare the number of faculty members at SFU today to those other universities, if they have a medical school, the comparison is apples to oranges because of the very large number of clinicians that are involved. But let's say in terms of regular faculty hires, as we're used to at SFU, 20 to 30 is roughly the size of biomedical physiology and kinesiology at SFU. 40 to 50 is roughly the size of the Faculty of Health Science. That's the comparisons that you can think of. In terms of space, we will not have a new medical school building by the fall of 2026. So we're certainly going to start with leased space if this program gets approved. But the intention would be to have a purpose-built medical school building that would be under construction, hopefully by then, if not completed by then. Another assumption, and this is something that both the president and the provost have been clear about a bunch of times, is that we expect the school to be fully funded, meaning funded through government grants, tuition, philanthropy, to not draw on the resources of the rest of the institution in order to deliver on its mission. So that's another working assumption for today. And the working assumption that is very important for today is that we build a medical school that's research intensive across a range of medical topics. And so we'll talk about that over the next few slides, but I think that that's something that I get a lot of questions about. Are we going to build a medical school that does research related to primary care and nothing else? And or that addresses one particular pillar of CIHR's program and nothing else. And that's not the intent. Next slide, please. So we think it's critical that we have a strong research program associated with our medical school. It's going to be essential for the long-term success of the school, for the reputation of the school, for attracting students to come to the school, and for attracting world-leading scholars and philanthropic funding for the school. The research program should also strengthen our connection to health professionals in BC, to community organizations, government, industry, and other partners. And it brings in additional expertise into British Columbia that benefit the students, but also patients across BC. So the research in the medical school is a very important part of the program. Next slide, please. So we do have a research working group that has been meeting and working on the research part of the business case. I think I see that there are some members of the working group on the call today. This was chaired by Tanya Bavella and Mike Richards. And the group has identified important elements of a socially accountable research program and key existing SFU research strengths that could be built on in a medical school. A couple of notes. One is that if we're going to build a medical school that's socially accountable, then you couldn't expect me to write down, this is exactly the research that would happen at a medical school today. It's going to be co-developed with our community partners, with government. It's going to respond to the needs of British Columbia. And so some of that could be co-developed now, but a bunch of it's going to be co-developed by the faculty members that are hired over time, and it's going to change over time. And also, we are hiring faculty members, and faculty members pursue their own research agendas without necessarily seeking direction from some VPR sitting in Strand Hall. And so things will evolve over time the way they would with any school or faculty that we create. At this stage, what we can do is provide some information that can be useful, can give direction, guidance, and provide a strategy to start building that school. Next slide, please. So this is from the research working group that we envision the research to span the 4 CIHR pillars of health research: biomedical, clinical, health system services, and population health. They've identified a starting point with 4 interdisciplinary themes and 9 research areas. Here are the 4 themes: Indigenous health and wellness, health equity for underserved and priority patients, communities, and populations, health communications and knowledge mobilization, and socially accountable in interdisciplinary medical education. So these 4 themes are things that cut across the 9 research areas that I'll be talking about on the next slide. And so things you keep in mind when building research programs around anything that you see on the next slide. So on to the next slide, please. So the first of the identified areas is also one of the cross-cutting themes from the previous slide, and that's Indigenous health and wellness. If you're doing health-related research at SFU, you probably recognize these areas as areas in which either you or some of your colleagues are already doing research and that you might already identify as being an area of strength at SFU. One of the things we try to do today is find out from this group if we've missed something that you think should be in the list. But health technology innovation, digital health and translational research is there, neuroscience, mental health and substance use, maternal and child health, gerontology, geriatrics and aging, infectious diseases and pandemics, chronic disease prevention, health promotion in communities, planetary health, and evidence-informed health system changes and transformation. So that's a pretty long list. It's a longer list probably than you would tackle with 20 faculty members to start a new medical school, but it's probably it gives a good representation of the breadth of activity that can and should happen in a medical school. Next slide, please. So just a couple words on research connections. So we should be thinking, I think, as a community about ways to connect what we already do at SFU to the new researchers being hired at the medical school. And when people talk about this, a couple of ideas typically get bounced around that I'd be happy to hear thoughts on today. Should we consider cross appointments? People in the medical school being cross appointed to an existing SFU department or faculty, or the other way around, new hires in SFU and other SFU schools, departments, faculties, getting cross appointed into the medical school. Should we consider health-focused interdisciplinary research institutes? Maybe we already have some of these research institutes that when new researchers join the medical school, they would also join an institute and through that mechanism get connected to other departments, schools, and faculties. Or should we create some thematic research institutes that are designed to bring bring new medical school researchers into contact with the rest of the university. Because one thing I don't think we should do, there's, the medical schools get started at various institutions at various stages of those institutions, their development. Sometimes it's almost greenfield in terms of medical research at an institution, but it's not that for us. We have a big, robust research program at the institution, including in human health. So how do we build a medical school that doesn't just become a silo or something that's isolated from the rest of the way we do research at SFU? And so I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts on things we can do very intentionally to bring connections between the medical school and everything else that we do. Next slide, please. And so I'm not sure if I pass it back to Mark now or after the slides, so I'll just say some words and see if he jumps in. But there are many other ways to provide feedback outside of this session. There is quite a nice website on the Provost and VP Academic website describing the medical school, and it includes the previous community consultation recording and will include this one as well. There's a SurveyMonkey survey out in the community. You'll see regular updates in the What's On newsletter, in the SFUFA newsletter. It's a standing item in Dean's Council. It's a standing item at the executive table. And there are future engagement sessions coming. And so in particular, if you would like other kinds of engagements around research, we'd be very happy to hear, that you'd love to have a focus group on aging in the medical school or something like that. If you have suggestions of that type, please submit them so that we can sort of tailor the way that we interact with the research community to what the research community would like to be interacted with. I think that's probably the end of my rambling, Mark.
Super. More than rambling, that's quite exciting. I don't think I'd seen the specifics of the research outlined quite so well before, and I am pumped. I'm actually full of questions, but I'm not going to ask my questions. We'll have a few minutes now to ask you 3 questions that have been submitted when people registered, and then we'll open it up for other questions for the people on the Zoom call. First, what are the research areas the medical school will focus on? And what will research collaborations between the medical school and other SFU faculties look like? You answered a bit of that, but do you have any more you'd like to add at this point?
Yeah, I guess I would say, you saw there were 9 areas that were outlined so far from the research working group. I think that there's a ways to go before that gets translated into, a group of faculty members, bringing in graduate student inside a medical school doing research, and to give you an idea of sort of the sequence, we have to have an approved medical school. We have to hire a dean. The dean has to hire a bunch of faculty members. Those faculty members have to develop research programs. There's quite a few steps between here and having an active research program in a medical school. But I would say that the research working group has done a great job of bringing together folks from across the institution and thinking about what it is that we already do that can contribute to research at the medical school. And so to me, that's what I showed in the slide deck is the starting point for the conversation.
Super. Second question was, what will recruitment of faculty for the new medical school look like? Yeah,
so that's as I just referred to in my previous answer, there would have to be for the start of delivery of programming in the fall of 2026, everything stays on schedule, then I expect there would be a dean recruiting faculty members next year. And so that would require, us getting a budget approval from the province and all that sort of thing about a year from now. And then a significant recruitment push to have faculty members, the first group of faculty members in place, say in 2025, getting ready for a delivery of programming in the fall of 2026, and admission of students probably early in 2026. So yeah, I think that's the rough timeline. Others, I think the timeline gets refined each week as we get closer, but that's the rough timeline.
Super. And the last of the submitted questions is about curriculum. Not sure how far you can answer this yet, but what will the curriculum be focused on?
Yeah, so I'm not going to end up being the medical school curriculum expert. I will say that as I mentioned in the presentation, we will be delivering a curriculum which is suited for anybody going through at an undergraduate level wanting to come out with an MD, and then there's postgraduate training. So it will be a complete medical doctor training, biomedical aspects and community health aspects and how to work with patients aspects, the full thing. And so if you're asking, do we have a complete curriculum made up yet? Well, no, we have a curriculum working group, and they've been taking great examples from other medical schools in Canada. But at the business case stage, this is about figuring out, roughly speaking, what resources are needed to deliver a curriculum. The final curriculum would have to go through Senate, and all of the steps needed to get through Senate, all of the subcommittees and everything, in order to be finalized and approved. And it has to be accredited by the external agency. So at this stage, we have a curriculum working group working through options for the business case phase of the curriculum, but we don't have a final selected, set of courses that will be offered in 2026 or anything like that.
Good. It's going to be such a fascinating aspect of the school. How do we create a curriculum that satisfies all the needs to train a doctor, but also satisfies a vision for a medical school that might be quite different than other medical school. So very excited about that. So we have about 15, maybe 20 minutes for you to ask questions of Dugan. And you won't be able to ask questions in the chat, so don't type them in. If you would like to ask a question, use the hand raising function. It's under, if you go to reactions, you'll see there's a hand raising function. I am not able to see most of you on my screen, so the only way I'll be able to call on you would be if you raise your hand. I'd also really encourage you to keep your questions brief so we can get in as many questions as we can. The more you talk, the less you'll hear from Dugan. So, and also I'll mention the obvious. Don't forget to unmute yourself and then mute yourself when you're done. And after you've asked your question, please take the hand down so that we can see that you're not still wanting to ask a question. I'm going to start with Bonnie Gray, followed by Chris Shaw and Diane Gramala, and then Diane Feingood. And then we'll carry on. Those are the first three. Hopefully we'll get a few more in. Bonnie, looking forward to your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Winston. So hi, Dugan. I just have a really quick question. So I know when we go to the working group list for all of them, including the working group for the research, and I'm not asking you to name names here because, I can understand if you don't want people don't want people coming and asking them direct questions and that sort of thing. But I was wondering how are these groups chosen? And if you can maybe briefly, for the research ones specifically, what faculties and or schools are you typically involving in these sorts of things, specific to the research one? Sure.
Thanks, Bonnie. So for the research working group, I don't actually know the answer to your question for all of the working groups. For the research working group, There was an attempt to get people from all of the different relevant faculties involved. So those are usually faculty members, sometimes associate deans research from those faculties. And the list was put together by the two co-chairs, which was Tanya and Mike. So Tanya, the Dean of Faculty of Health Science, and Mike, AVPR, in order to try to get some kind of broad coverage. This exercise is a quick turnaround business case building exercise. That was the focus of this committee. There's going to be more committees formed between now and 2026, working on all sorts of aspects of the medical school. But this one was, I think the first meeting was probably in January. The last meeting has happened in order to get content together for the draft business case.
Thank you, Dugan. And just a reminder, when you do ask your question, if you're comfortable and able to put yourself on the video, it would just make it a bit easier and more interactive. Chris and Diane, one of you or both of you has a question.
Yes, hi. So Chris and I develop interactive technology for person-centered healthcare and wellness. And of all the conferences we go to on the planet, there seems to be a lot of interest and investment. It's one of the fastest growing area in the tech domain. But what's exciting to me is, even though NIH, for example, invested $70 million recently in virtual reality, their approach doesn't really build on the lived experience of patients. And even though you hear patient-centered language, the kind of curricula that I see and the computer science labs in these medical schools really don't have that as a central approach yet. So I guess my contribution is more of an observation, but the question part of it is, I'd love to know how we can take advantage of Canada's, what we're best at, areas of social justice and taking into account lived experience. And, my personal goal is based on my own lived experience of chronic pain, but the goal of the technology is so that people won't have to use it in the future. It helps them become well enough to not need it. So how, maybe it's a question that can't be answered easily, but how can we really draw on what's best of what we can offer in Canada?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I was in response to your question, I was thinking about how we draw on what's best about SFU's approach to doing research, and including patients in the design of the work the way that you do, but also the way we include community members in the work that we do outside of the medical domain at SFU. So community engagement or patient-oriented research or whatever appropriate terminology is for the type of research being done. I think that's something that SFU is known for, something that we're strong at, and I hope that we can carry that over into the way we approach research in the medical school. And I think it's one of the reasons you wouldn't want to see the medical school built as a silo. Here's the standalone, beautiful, shiny building in Surrey, disconnected from the experiences of other SFU researchers who want to bring that kind of approach to doing research into the school as well. And yeah, does it in terms of the Canadian approach and social justice? I'm probably not expert enough to know the difference between, say, the average Canadian medical school and the average American medical school, or something like that. I just hope that we bring our unique SFU special sauce into our medical school.
Thank you, Dugan. Diane, and then Ellen Balka. And we probably have time for one or two more questions after Ellen, if anybody wants to add. But Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dugan, for the presentation. It's always great to get more information. And like Mark, I get hugely excited when I hear about what we're trying to do, and then I get deeply worried that walking the talk is not a simple matter, and it understanding the complexity of walking that talk, given the need for a business plan and the way one can create that, the questions that you're getting, that's all, those are all challenging things. So I don't envy you the task, but I do think that just a couple of quick comments. One is about the student body and what they're trained to do and where they go. We'll need to think about how we enrich that student body before they even come into the medical school, so that we've got people who are predisposed. And I know that the Northern Ontario Medical School did a really good job of that. I've talked to Roger about this, but I think our challenge will be even greater. So it's definitely something that will be important. And how we go about that is a research question as well. Like there are publications to be written about how we go about that work. And I hope we're starting to think about that level of research, or even developmental evaluation of the work that's underway, in order to really walk the talk of becoming a school that can learn from what it does. Because in the health services area, learning health systems is a dominant theme. And so having people think about it that way, I think, is really important. But I wanted to pick up on the interdisciplinarity thing and say, oh, God, I just love hearing those words, because SFU has been really difficult to be an interdisciplinary researcher at, and particularly because those relationships start in teaching. And it's really hard to be an interdisciplinary teacher in this institution and teach across faculty appointments and all of that sort of stuff. So I guess my question is, how are you thinking about that problem, and how can we, as a body of people who are sitting here now interested in this, contribute to thinking about that interdisciplinarity and the mechanisms by which we would be best served to do that in our context at SFU? Yeah. So sorry, too many words, but there's some tough questions here.
Yeah, there are on the interdisciplinary. On the interdisciplinary business, I can say that, I have certain structures as VPR that I work with all the time, and institutes are, that kind of structure, that's the tool. And so sometimes I'd say, I have the hammer, so everything looks like a nail. So I'm going to answer your question with, why don't we use research institutes? So nothing in our policy at the institution actually prevents us from doing teaching out of a research institute either. And so it doesn't say you should, it just doesn't say you can't. So if we're going to create interdisciplinary structures to do research, and that helps bring together people from existing faculties at SFU, then maybe and the new medical school, maybe this is a moment where we can open up the discussion of, are there interdisciplinary things that we can do between the medical school and the non-medical school SFU, not just on the research side, but also on the teaching side. Keeping in mind, of course, that a medical school is a very constrained beast with accreditation requirements and all of these sorts of things. But I don't. Change is a moment to change like this is a moment to re-examine some of the structures and what's allowed and what's not allowed, and to think creatively and pilot some things. So I would, if you're going to submit some suggestions of ways that we can do interdisciplinary teaching, and you even submit it to some crazy VPRI like person, he'd be happy to read those suggestions.
Happy to offer my suggestions if you want to read them or even talk about them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Diane.
We have time for two more questions. I see Ellen Balka and then HK Anderson. So Ellen, go ahead.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm going to be atypically brief. First of all, I echo what Diane said. And secondly, my question is this. and it has resource implications. That's particularly why I want to ask it, is what will you be doing, or will we be doing, or can be done to ensure that those typically not seen as central to a medical school, such as social scientists or humanities-oriented researchers, are on an even playing field so that they can adequately contribute to research being undertaken in the medical school? And related to that, how will we be overcoming issues related to the multi-campus factor? And I ask those questions based on years of experience of holding a position at VGH, and years of people coming to me and saying things like, oh, I've got this emergency, year 4 fellow who really needs to do some qualitative research. It's just easy. Can't you just teach them how to do that? And first of all, that's a problem. If people need to learn that, we need to build that into the curriculum, but we also need to facilitate putting people who have that skill set into the mix. So thanks, I'll mute now.
So Ellen, the question is, from the side of the university, the more social sciences and humanities focused health related research, you think that there are some barriers in traditional medical schools to being inclusive and getting that research, the profile that it needs and the support that it needs, so that that can be done well. And I don't know the answer to your question about how are we going to ensure that that doesn't happen when we build our medical school. But I would certainly be happy to hear, not happy, I would be willing to hear that there are barriers, not happy to hear that there are, but to hear what the barriers are, and if you have ideas of how we could help overcome them. What's from a central administration point of view, or from the design of research support structures for a new school, what could you do to help draw in those researchers from other parts of the campus, and with a less biomedical focus, perhaps, that want to get important research done in association with the medical school?
Good, thank you, Dugan. Last question,
What-
H.K. Anderson.
Can I just make one really quick comment, which is, it would be great to have a focus group of people like myself and David Whitehurst and some other people that have actually had a foot in both doors for many years, and to pick our brains about that.
Okay, thank you, Ellen.
HK.
All right, thanks. It's Holly. I'm in the
Holly.
I'm in the philosophy department, and I do philosophy of science. And actually, one of my subspecialties is philosophy of medicine. And over in the philosophy department here does a great deal of stuff that's actually related to things in medical schools. And I was just back at my university where I did my PhD, the University of Pittsburgh, and they actually have required courses that they take in philosophy of science and other things, because there seems to be this idea that philosophy just does like bioethics and stuff like this. But we actually have a lot of people who specialize in law and social justice, and people like me who specialize in sort of, other issues related to philosophy of medicine and reasoning in medicine. How do you adjudicate like the evidential standards for randomized controlled trials versus mechanisms, stuff like this. And I'm kind of bringing together things that other people have said here, but I'm a little bit worried that we're getting completely left out of the discussion, because I think people don't know what it is that we do. And I think we sort of bring some good stuff, but I've been trying to sort of raise attention to this, but nobody in my department is on any of these committees or has been contacted about any of this stuff. And we've had a problem in the past where there is some bioethics done in the Faculty of Health Sciences, but it's been kept sort of very segregated from what we do in philosophy. So we don't get to do it because they do it. And they tried to put on a philosophy of science course that really just was sort of a sort of under expertise taught version of courses that we already have on the books. So I'm a little bit worried that with the kind of sort of widely dispersed expertise across different faculties that we already have, that we're not drawing on the people who are here, and I'm not sure how to get that across more clearly. So I feel like I've been filling it in the surveys and in other places, and it's still not coming through. So I was a little concerned when you said, we could have people who get hired also be cross-appointed in 2 different places, but we have people right now who could be cross-appointed and who could be also participating in this a little bit more.
Okay, thank you, Holly. Yeah, I think I think the point that you make, I mean, you're pointing out that we already have difficulties within our own institution without a medical school of getting, a course that's on the books in philosophy, recognized in the Faculty of Health Science. And we're going to make it, in the creation of a new medical school, we have the potential to do that all over the place. We have a whole curriculum to implement, and we could implement that whole curriculum without ever looking at our own philosophy department, Faculty of Health Science, other places. And right now, I completely agree with you that the things that are relevant to a medical school at SFU are spread throughout our programs, throughout our faculty, throughout our graduate student body, across all 8 faculties at the institution. And so it is going to be quite a job to create the pathways for people, for example, in the philosophy department, to have input and to, maybe we don't have to hire somebody in the medical school to teach a course related to the philosophy of science. If that's part of the curriculum, maybe we should be coming to you. And how do we ensure that we do come to you? And so I also don't have the answer to that, but I will be keeping philosophy in mind as we go forward on the list of groups across the campus that are working on health-related issues that maybe don't have a voice in the process right now.
Thank you, Dugan. We're going to move into breakout groups in a moment. Just to thank Dugan again for your thoughtful answers to what are there's clearly a lot of interest in participating in the medical school. And just a reminder maybe to all of us, it's very early days. Many of your questions can't be answered because we don't know, but you've really provided some wonderful ideas for how to make sure that those questions get included as we develop the process for the medical school. We're now moving into a breakout room part of the program. In your registration, many of you indicated that you'd only be staying for the information session and you'd be departing before the breakouts. Any of you are welcome to stay, but if you are going to skip the breakouts, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your coming. But in a moment, we'd ask you to leave the call so that we can organize the breakouts. And just a reminder, if you'd like to have more input, there is a survey that's been posted in the chat that you can connect to. For those of you who are staying, in a few moments, you're going to be randomly divided into breakout rooms, and you'll have about 40 minutes to discuss. And all the rooms will be answering the same 4 questions, which we're going to post in the chat now. The questions are this: how can your research program or that of your department, school, or faculty help shape the research direction of our new medical school? Are you aware of existing research partnerships, facilities, or other assets that would be of value to the research program of a new medical school? Secondly, in what ways could your research or that of your department, school, or faculty benefit from the creation of a new medical school? Third, do you have any concerns about the impact of the SFU Medical School on research at SFU? Any suggestions that would address those concerns? And finally, how could we assure that we build effective research linkages between existing SFU research programs and new programs created at the medical school? A couple of quick things about the breakout groups. There will be someone taking notes, but the comments will not be attributed. That is, they'll be taking notes about what's said, but nobody will be identifying you. So whatever you want to say, you will be anonymous. There will be a facilitator in your room. You may be joined in your room by someone from the medical school planning committee or by Dugan, and they are not there to answer your questions. They are there solely to listen. So if Dugan's in your group and you're tempted to ask him questions, please don't. This is your chance to have input and not putting Dugan on the hot seat again. He's really there to listen, and your facilitators will remind you of that. Now, just before we go to the breakout rooms, I'd like to give just another minute for those of you who'd like to depart, to leave the call. Melvin's currently frantically working behind the scenes to make sure that each of our rooms has a balanced number of participants. So it really helps us to get a clear picture of who's staying and who's not, if you would exit now if you don't want to take part in the breakouts. We really appreciate you joining us. So the breakout questions are up here and they'll be in the chat. Melvin, are we ready to move people into their 40-minute breakout sessions?
We absolutely are.
Okay, have a great time. See you in 40 minutes. All right, everybody's there who wants to be there. I always love this moment when everybody just, it's so science fiction-y. Welcome back, everyone. We'll just wait another few seconds for everybody to reappear. Okay. Hope you all had excellent discussions in your breakout groups. Just before we ask Dugan to wrap up with a few final thoughts, just wanted to let you all know that the notes that people made during your breakout groups will be used for what we heard report. And again, not attributed to any of you individually. And you'll be hearing that, seeing that in the next number of weeks. Also, if you go to the medical school website, it'll be updated soon with today's recording. And the survey is available if you'd like to share additional ideas and thoughts. And again, you can find the address for the survey on the medical school site or in the chat. I'd like to now pass it back to Dugan to share his thoughts on today's session, next steps, anything about what you heard. Dugan.
Great, thanks, Mark. Yeah, we had a great discussion. I didn't say anything. We had a great discussion in the breakout room that I was in. I hope the other one was as had as many ideas floating around as well. One of the things, there's a few things that that came out through both the general Q&A and the breakout room I was in around trying to get people together from inside and outside the medical school and from different perspectives. So in our group, we had a health systems researcher and an engineer and a chemistry grad student and a communications expert. And I think there were, if you could imagine taking that and doing like 10 of them across the university, there would be a lot of different ideas and perspectives that we could bring together. So one of the things that I'm taking away as homework from today's session is to think carefully about the engagements we do around research. We really are at the beginning, for research, thinking about research at the medical school. And I think we're going to need a bunch of venues over the next couple of years in the planning phase, and then we're going to need venues when we actually have, hopefully, we have medical school, and we have faculty members hired into that medical school. We're going to need opportunities to bring those faculty members and graduate students and other researchers in the medical school together with folks from across the campus in obviously health-focused units like Faculty of Health Science or BPK or something, and in the units that have health researchers, but it's not in the name of the unit. So so if you have suggestions you'd like to put into any form if you like about how we should bring people together during this planning phase, I'm very keen and eager to figure some of that out and bring together more groups like this, maybe in real life, in addition to Zoom type platforms. That's it. That's it for me, Mark.
Thank you so much, Dugan, and thanks to all of you for being with us today, for sharing your thoughts. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful sunny afternoon, and hopefully we will see you again in next stages as the medical school becomes a reality. So take care, all.